Welcome back to Module 3, the last module in our Strategic Training Older Adult Technology series. This module deals with instructional design by giving you some practical tools and some knowledge about the role of leadership in the learning culture. Now, effective instructional design is that which gives us the best results. But the best results talk to us about speed, let's say the efficiency of our programs, how quickly we can get our older adults to take on new technological skills, but also in the long term, how does this training give us a better return on our investments over the long term? So in this chapter, we're going to discuss in detail the role of leadership in the learning culture of your organization. We're going to talk about some unique design methods that really center the learner, not the application that you're implementing, to give you some better yield on your training efforts. And finally, we're going to give you an instructional model called the MAIN, or MAIN model, of things you should look at, making sure it includes in all of your future technology training. So let's jump right into the learning culture. Now, you may have heard of the Gallup organization. It's an analytical and survey and analytical resource for businesses. And you may have heard of, let's say, the Gallup survey, opinion survey. Well, recently, they had a 12-question employee engagement study that they rolled out to many different organizations. And they started to focus on several different dimensions of employee engagement, but this one in particular had to do with leadership. And the question was, why is encouraging employee development a way to boost engagement? Well, I want you to watch this video by one of the directors of this study and listen for some key phrases that we'll debrief with on the other side that are pertinent to how leadership may play an indispensable and very important part in your next learning effort.
The number one reason that people change jobs nowadays is what they call career development. Unfortunately, almost all people, a little over 2/3 of people, say that when they change jobs, they actually change companies. And that's because they don't see the opportunities for development inside the organization. This is one of the most critical of all 12 elements because it says something about how people see their future. We saw back in the last recession that when people inside an organization felt that somebody is really interested and encourages their development, that they didn't take the hit of the recession like other people did. They could see their way out of it because they could see their part in what's about to happen and how they were progressing in spite of the downturn. They even had more positive feelings about their standard of living. And so if you think about development from the perspective of it's an ongoing need that doesn't leave even when we get older, or we get promoted in an organization, or we reach a high status in an organization, it's still there. Unfortunately, it doesn't improve as people progress. And so we have to think about what's always the next step with each person and to think about it from an individual perspective. We all develop differently through our strengths. So to know the strengths of each person is a foundation for getting development right and involving the person in that discussion as opposed to just assuming and delegating what that development should be. It's really hard to force mentors on people, for instance. We got to give the individuals options and help them see people inside the organization who've progressed and had some success and give them the opportunity to partner with those people. But it's very difficult to force that because development is really the response or the relationship between one person and another over time.
Okay, well, let's recap that video about how leaders impact personal development in the workplace. First of all, people are very resilient, and we need to give them more credit than we do sometimes. And they're very resilient in times of change and disruption. But this is really tied to how they feel an organization is interested in their personal development. See, many times in a digital disruption or a time of technological crisis, we're focused on bringing in a new piece of technology when we have the greatest investment in our organizations, which is our people. And so there's an ongoing need to be developed. This is not just a one-time effort. We need to look at our people as resources that need to constantly be upgraded and upgrade them with skills that continue out regardless of age all throughout the life cycle at an organization. We also heard in the video how knowing your strengths and knowing the strengths of each person in your organization is fundamental and foundational to getting development right. In other words, increased communication between leaders and adults in the location, the workforce, will help us create more customized and more relevant learning resources for them. Think about this the next time that you have restrictions on time or budgetary constraints on rolling out the next piece of technology. Making sure that it's targeted and very contextualized will benefit both the learner and the organization in those training efforts. And finally, he talked about involving people in their own development. And this is something we have talked about from Malcolm Knowles' adult learning principles to now, because development is a relationship, not just with the organization as a whole, but it's relationships between those that have knowledge, those that have an opportunity to develop others, and those that might need it. Remember, these are things that ground our workforce. Think about these statistics. When employees strongly agree that they trust the leadership of their organization, they're 4 times as likely to be engaged. Think about how powerful this is. Trust will overcome many of those myths and stereotype assumptions that you have if it's present in the organization. We also find that employees who strongly agree that leaders help them see how the changes made today will affect their organization in the future. Remember that micro to macro. If we can paint that picture, if we can communicate that, those employees are 7.5 times likely to feel connected to their company culture. Leaders have an indelible impact on the learning culture, and we need to connect our older adults back to the technology learning culture of the organization by increasing and improving our communication. And finally, this powerful statistics on when employees strongly agree that leadership of their organization communicates effectively with the rest of the organizations, then they're 73% less likely to feel burned out. And we know that from the Great Resignation to the COVID-19 exodus, many people were just burned out and left their workplaces. Remember, these are moments that impact the shared knowledge of the organization when that talent, when that knowledge, skills, and ability walks out the door. So communication is vital. Training cultures and the role of leaders is important. And here are some ways that leaders affect or have a role in the adult learning process. They can provide tangible support. For example, making sure that there's an adequate training budget, or communicate the expectations of the workforce during training. Provide access to the technology, both at home and at office, with equipment, with time. Make sure that there are competent trainers, not just on the technology side, but also to the workflow side. And finally, making sure that there's face-to-face support throughout the learning process. But there's also a psychological component that is indicative of the culture and environment that you work in. Think about a place where learners can experience psychological safety. And this is defined as a place where you can speak up, where you can learn from your mistakes, where it's not overly competitive, where at the sign of one failure or one mistake, you're immediately disqualified. Remember the important role that trust has on the relationship between the employee and the organization. So providing a psychologically safe environment is very conducive to learning. Also, personal development and leadership opportunities can appear throughout the learning process, and leaders should work hard to find those. For example, finding super user or subject matter expert opportunities. Remember, leader attitude towards older workers can act as a social contagion and impact the workers' ability to learn and their desire to learn. This is supported by a research project that took place. It was a very unique project overseas, where we surveyed leaders and found out that they didn't have a really good opinion about older adults and technology, and said, well, they're going to resist it anyways. It's probably not worth doing these programs. They don't want to do this. They're not able to do this. And in a separate study, without revealing the results of that first study, workers were interviewed, and we found that they had a tendency to downplay their own abilities and doubt, and had low confidence in their ability to take on new technology, because the leader's attitude has acted as a social contagion and contaminated the waters of confidence on the worker side, even without explicit communication. It was implied in the learning culture of the organization. So we think that there's a better model for technology learning because our current models are in the workplace, are very much instructor and curriculum centered. This is where we find someone who knows the system well. We develop a training program with 10, 15, 30, 40 learning points that we have to get out. And we focus the agenda on what the application does, what it can do for our departments, what are the proper functions, and what are the things we have to do in it. It tends to be very unidirectional, whether it's an online course that they just passively take or an instructor face-to-face led experience. These learning experiences tend to be very, from the front to the back of the room, unidirectional. But we find that instructional design that centers the learner is focused on the learner, not the application. You can incorporate the 7 dimensions we shared in Module 2, but you can also be mindful of workflow and role-specific training that would make your material more relevant. Remember, that is what older adults are interested in. Active learning, simulations, real-world problems that they can solve, and putting in pre- and post-learning assessments so that both older adults and leaders can gauge the effectiveness of their learning are key components of any older adult technology program. So, we want to leave you with a practical model called the MAIN or MAIN model that has been used with different technology learning environments. And it has brought great results in being able to identify key components that you need to keep your eye on that can improve learning retention, skills, and also give you a better return, making your programs more effective. So think about M as modalities, where you include both video and in-person experiences that create a sense of realism in problem solving. I worked for years in a healthcare IT department, and I was tasked with teaching clinicians from all different types of specialties how to use the same application. What really made it unique for us was when we were able to, for example, create child-based scenarios for pediatric lines of services, or women's services featuring women in their examples, and cardiology patients going through the cardiology modules. This made our training way more effective because it gave the learner a sense of realism, that they were really in the actual clinical environment. So online modalities need to be accessible and need to be easily understood. And so sometimes that comes with taking pre-learning, let's say on a mobile phone before you get to the classroom, or people can learn it on any type of device on different platforms before they actually get into using the application. Beyond the modalities, we find that agency, or those elements that a learner can control, are very key for adult learners. Now, we covered these topics throughout this course, so make sure that you consider that learners have a lifetime of experiences and they learn best when the content is relevant for them. And this type of relevant content, when they look at their coworkers, look around them in the classroom, this could be the springboard for creating community, especially when you give a safe space for workers to speak up about the areas that concern them the most in their learning process. The I for MAIN stands for interactivity. Now, media that is very interactive and acknowledges the user input raises the ability to pay attention. Remember, in the social learning model, paying attention helps with retention and reproduction of skills. So make sure that either your system is giving feedback or your support team is giving feedback. And make sure that the learners are engaged in the type of activities that emulate what they do at work and allow them to find either benefits or flaws in your teaching systems. That's right. Learners that can critique their own learning systems can help the organization improve the learning systems. And finally, the N is for navigability. Now, this is a very design-specific feature. You may need to make sure that the movements within your training system match their workflow. Again, in one of the learning environments I was in, folks had to check in someone to a desk and take down 5, 6 pieces of information. make sure that they're taking down the information in the order that agrees with the system, but also doesn't leave behind the actual workflow. In some cases, you might see an opportunity to improve a workflow, find efficiencies by creating systems with less steps, not more. Also, there are system features like scaffolding, where the system may ask a learner, are you sure you want to do this before you click this button? Make sure that those features are built in because, again, the ability to provide a safe place where people can make mistakes or question the system will increase retention and the ability to reproduce skills. Does it include some kind of gamification? This is a new concept in adult learning as well as child learning, where we give rewards for steps completed. You might create a medallion system or a certificate of completion along the way. Make sure that you provide these incentives because older adults are sometimes motivated by some of the same things that might motivate their younger counterparts. A sense of accomplishment, something that raises their personal self-esteem. Well, we're drawing close here to the course. We've covered 3 different areas in these 3 modules. We started out talking about the way that adults engage with technology, and we were able to bust a lot of myths about whether they want to or can engage with technology. And overwhelmingly, we know that they can and they are willing. But learning is unique. Learning dynamics for older adults are unique if we make sure that we keep in mind the assumptions and principles of adult learning and make our material reflective of that understanding. And finally, we know that leadership has a key role as a social contagion as such that can impact the learning culture of our organization with tangible support, communicative support. And if we take the time to design environments that are intentionally incorporating older adult learning dynamics, we can raise the motivation to learn, raise the effectiveness to learn, and be better stewards of our instructional resources in the workplace. That brings us to the end of this course. Really glad that we got to cover these points together. But if you need more of a customizable or unique learning program designed for your workplace, feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information. Really glad we got to spend this time together. Please make sure to take those surveys, those assessments, cover this material with your teams, complete all the reviews in the handbook, and we'll see you out there.